Okay. Oh, it's the shaking stuff. Okay, great. Okay, well, why don't we get started? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Entire Bible, where we do the entire Bible. We are on episode 23 tonight, and we are in midway through the story of David. We have actually spent two weeks on David. We had well, no, we had David and Saul, and then we had the second part of David and Saul when David becomes king. We ended with him becoming king, and now we're going to learn about his dynasty, right? The house of David. Um, just a little historical footnote. There's very little in what we've looked at so far in the Bible has any kind of historical corroboration we can point to, but the house of David is, in fact, something that is mentioned in an inscription um, from about the 8th century BC, which would have been after these events, but still, it speaks of the Beit David, the house of David, which suggests that there really was a house of David. Not that we needed to question that specific point, but yeah, we're sort of moving into the realm of a little more verifiable history. Um, but of course, we're also in the realm of drama. We'll get plenty of drama tonight. So, where did we leave off? Last week, if I turned it on, last week, David had become king, right? He was king of Judah, his own tribal territory for a while. Then he became king of Israel when the rival kingship sort of collapsed under its own weight. The rival general joined David. He made a deal with David, and then one of David's underlings murdered him. David went through great lengths to say, "It wasn't my fault. I didn't want him to die." Right? But anyway, he is now king over all Israel. And the very after he becomes king, the very next thing we are told is that he went up to Jerusalem against the Jebusites. These are the people who inhabit, and this it's actually anachronistic to call it Jerusalem. It's called Jebus. That was its name. So the Jebusites are the people who live around there. So notice it doesn't say why he decided to attack this city, but notice where it is. So he has been the king of Judah up until now with his capital at Hebron, and he's just become the king of Israel. And Jebus it's not an Israelite city, it's a city of Canaanites. Why would he suddenly attack that city, do you think? Doesn't say. He could attack anyone, but why attack these people? So what do you do if your capital and the seat of your power is way down here in the southern part of your kingdom, and you have all the rest of this all up here? You want a more centrally located sort of place to be, and that is exactly the function of this city. The city will become very important later on because it will become the um, the permanent residence of the God of Israel in the house that David's son will build. And then it becomes sort of this mystical center of the cosmos, right? But it's not there yet. So this is the story about how Jerusalem becomes part of David's kingdom. So we're told that the people of Jerusalem said to David, "You won't enter here. The blind and the lame will drive you away." It's this interesting statement. The narrator says this is their way of saying David shall not enter here. Um, you can already kind of figure that out from the first thing they said. But presumably, when they say the blind and the lame will drive you away, maybe here they are looking down from the walls. Maybe they're saying, our walls are so strong, even a blind person could, drop a rock on you and you would be defeated. Sort of like, you can't take us. We're too powerful. So David responds. Well, we're told that he captures it nonetheless. So this is a reconstruction of what Jerusalem might have looked like. Jebus might have looked like, notionally around the 10th century BC. And if we were able to do a time lapse photography and have this become more modern, this little spot here would expand. All of this would become part of the city. So this was the original city. Um, it's called the Fortress of Zion. Zion will actually be this mountain here, but it's this hill. So it's this fortified town, basically, that he captures. How does he do it? Well, he captures it by having his men climb up the water shaft. So this is apparently where the water either goes up or down to the city. Because if you're on a top of a hill, you need to get water safely without, enemies getting to you. So anyway, he has his men climb up this thing, and so he says, um, "Climb up here. The lame and the blind shall be my personal enemies from now on." Um, and that is why he says, "The blind and the lame shall not enter this place." So it's almost like he takes a saying against him and he turns it around, right? He says, "Well, you said that the blind and the lame could keep me out. I'm going to keep the blind and the lame out." Now, there's no narrative of him like, proclaiming laws that blind people can't come into my city, but it's like it's a saying. And so our narrative is obviously interested in this place and where the sayings about it might have come from. Okay, so he captures it, he takes up residence there, and he calls it Davidopolis, if this was in Greek, right? Polis means city, the city of David. Okay, so he builds that up, makes it bigger, and he becomes powerful. Okay. Uh, he is noticed by a neighboring potentate named Hiram, the king of Tyre. So Tyre is this Phoenician or Canaanite city-state on the coast of the Mediterranean. We'll hear about that a lot later on. The Phoenicians, the Greeks called them the Phoenicians because the term phoenix, which is also the word phoenix, originally meant red. And they were known for cloth that was red or purple dyed. And so they were the Phoenicians, the red guys. But natively, they were Canaanites. And in fact, in later inscriptions, Tyre is referred to as the mother of Canaan, right? So the metropolis, as it were. Anyway, so this big mercantile king sends messengers to David along with cedar wood and carpenters and masons who are going to build a house for him. So he's like being, I'm going to build a house for you. I'm going to be nice to you. So there's this friendship that strikes up between the two of them. Now, probably if you're a merchant, you're not striking up friendships just to be friendly. You probably want something in return, like trade privileges or something like that, because Jerusalem actually controls various landward trade routes through the Judean hills. And so if you're friendly with David, well, he's likely to, give you some privileges and make sure all of the raw materials go to Tyre. But anyway, that's background. Okay. Then we're told that David knew that God had established him over Israel and exalted him. Okay, so good that he knows that. We're told he took more concubines and wives in Jerusalem because he already had as a couple right by now. Um, after he had come from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to him. We'll learn about some of those later. This is what kings normally do because you establish relationships with other powers through marriage. Right? Okay. We're told the bad guys, the Philistines, hear about it and they go out to battle him. And so he has a couple battles. So they have a battle. He consults his divination device when he has to attack, and he defeats the enemy. And we're told that the Philistines abandoned their gods on the battlefield, and David and his men carried them away. Now, I wasn't able to find a good picture of Philistine gods. I don't think we have many images, artifacts from the Philistines, but probably they are meant to be figurines of some kind. Um, I found one painting that shows David burning these things, which I'm not sure that that's what it says he did. It doesn't say he burned them, it says he took them. Because normally what you do is you symbolize the defeat of an enemy by taking their divine images and putting them, dedicating them in your God's shrine. That's more likely what happened there. Anyway, he wins a battle. Again, another battle, another consultation, and another victory. Okay, so he wins twice. He assembles all of his men, and then he's going to go get the box, right? The golden box. This is the so-called Ark or Box of the Covenant. It showed up in the book of Joshua. It was in the book of Exodus. Remember that at the beginning of the book of Samuel, it was captured by the Philistines and caused them no end of trouble. So the Philistines sent it back, and but there was no particular place for it to go, right? So they found a village to put it in, and they found out that it was actually kind of dangerous to touch. If you touched it, then you died, kind of like it's contagious. So David says they're going to go to this place where it is, and they're going to get that ark. So the question is, what does he want the ark for? What does he want to do with it? Remember that the ark is a throne. Literally, this is like a footstool. And I mean, it's kind of a pointy footstool, the way this is represented. But the idea, the symbolism is that you have your God as king, and this is where his toes touch the earth. So it's like where the sacred and the ordinary meet. That's kind of the symbolism of this. Why do you think a king would want to hold on to that? Why would he want that? He's going to go through great efforts to get hold of this thing. It's been just sitting around in a village. Yeah.
In a way, like symbolize what he's
As we just saw a few verses earlier, this is a way to visibly represent. He represented it on the battlefield, but now he's going to represent it in a permanent way, a symbolic way, right? By having this object close to him, right? If he's the king and he's representing God's sovereignty over Israel, well, let's have the symbol of sovereignty there, right? Okay, so they go get it. They're going to move it, and unfortunately, and everyone's happy. They're singing and dancing, and unfortunately, I like it. The like it hit a rock, and this guy says, "Oh, don't let it fall," and then he touches it and he dies. So it's still lethal. And David's sad. He's angry about this actually. So he says, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? So now we really see explicitly he wants this thing. So he eventually takes it to another town and waits to see if anyone else dies. And when no one else dies, he says, well, this must be a favorable place. So he makes a sacrifice. Thank you, God, for not killing anyone. And then he dances as they bring it to his capital. Right? So this is how he establishes his sovereignty, by getting that symbol. Um, and as he is dancing, we're told that Michal, who was his first wife, recently reacquired from the house of Saul, she sees him and she despises him for some reason. Well, maybe she despises him because he tore her from her current husband. Who knows? She didn't like it. And anyway, they get the ark into a tent and make some sacrifices to dedicate it. And there's a big feast, right? He gives food to everyone in the city to celebrate this great event. Later on, though, wife comes up and says, why were you dancing like that in front of all those other girls? That's kind of undignified for a king. And he says, well, I was dancing before the Lord, and if I'm being undignified, then let me be still more undignified. I will be lowly in your eyes, but in the eyes of slave girls you spoke, I will be somebody. So I don't know what's going on here. There's some sort of marital dispute. And, this is like when you say something by saying something else. So what is it actually that's going on? And we could explore that. But interestingly, the last we hear about her is this: she was childless to the day she died. Now, does that mean that God said, oh, you thought David was being undignified, I'm going to prevent you from having children? Ha! Or does she choose not to have anything to do with this man anymore? Either of those are possibilities, maybe even more. But anyway, she's sort of out of the picture now. Okay, now, important moment. So he takes up residence in his house that Hiram built for him. And he's got the tent right next door with the thing in it. And he brings in his prophet. He has a new prophet now whose name is Nathan. And he says, here I am living in a house of cedar. Thank you, Hiram. But the ark of God dwells in a tent! Exclamation point. What do you think he means by that? Here I am dwelling in this great palace, and the ark of God dwells in a tent! Exclamation point. So maybe he thinks there's something wrong with this picture, right? Remember, the whole idea was that, that Yahweh is the king of Israel, and the human surrogate is simply a nagid. He is simply a stand-in. He has no independent authority. all he can do is, follow the will of God for the people and manifest that divine justice where possible. So he's saying there's something wrong with, I didn't get this house. It was given to me, right? With the keys in it. But there's a tent for that. There's something asymmetrical about this. So Nathan seems to it seems like he's thinking about somebody. So do whatever you want, he says. Well, God preempts any action by having a conversation with the prophet. So he says to Nathan, tell David this. Is it you, David, who would build for me, God, a house to dwell in? Question mark. Rhetorical question. I have never dwelt in a house from the day that I brought Israel from Egypt to this day, but I've been going about in a tent. As long as I've wandered among the Israelites, did I ever say a word to any of the judges before you? Why have you not built me a house of cedar? Now, if we left the conversation at that, what does it sound? How is God reacting to this, do you think? What's one way of reading this? David says, I live in a palace, God lives in a tent. He says, well, I didn't ask you. Did I ever ask you to build a house for me?
Do you think, well, David knew they were only basically to have one wife. Do you think that maybe he thought
Did he?
he was, kings are different, but
Well,
he felt about that as the reason why he wanted to build a temple?
I'm not sure exactly how those two would fit, actually. Yeah, I don't think there's any premise of monogamy here. Later on in Israelite history, polygamy will become less practiced, and it'll still be a possibility, mainly for kings, but generally it kind of dies out on its own. But there's never any critique of it, as far as I can see. Um, but suggesting that he doesn't feel right about the way things are, certainly, right? But what do you think about God's response here? Is he saying that's a good idea? That's a bad idea? I don't care? Or is he expressing surprise? I didn't ask you for this. If you just left it at this, it might sound like God is a bit, how dare you? But we'll see that God is actually happy. He's happy because this is unpremeditated. This was not some divine thought that he had to implant in David's brain. It is not a command that he gave him. It's entirely gratuitous. David on his own saw that this was not the right picture. Uh, and God is saying, wow, you figured that out on your own. And he's going to look kindly upon David for that. He's going to continue. This is his message that he's going to give. Speak to him. Say, this is what I took you from the pasture of the flock to become ruler of my people. I was with you wherever you went. I cut down your enemies. I'll make you your name great. I'll assign a place for my people and will plant them in it to dwell there. They will never again be disturbed, nor shall the wicked ever again oppress them. Famous last words, as they did at the beginning from the day that when I appointed judges over my people Israel. I will give you, I assume he's talking to David now, rest from all your enemies. So this is a pretty amazing statement. So yeah, he's saying, I never asked you this, but look at all the things I did for you. And I'm also going to set up a situation where there's no evil in the world anymore. No oppression, no disturbance. This is aspirational, obviously, right? But it's kind of important for later ideas, the history of ideas, that what's about to happen here is meant to signify a future, a kind of idealized future, right? Where nothing bad ever happens anymore, where the bad stuff that we've seen with Saul and all those people would never again happen. Of course, this aspirational language makes what happens next with David even more pernicious, obviously, because he's going to disturb people and oppress them. But nevertheless, this is the ideal. Okay, he continues. So this is the second part. So I'm going to do some good things for my people. Also, I'm going to, the Lord, Yahweh, will make a house for you. Notice how God reverses the question. Will you make a house for me? No, I'll make a house for you. Now, God is playing on the fact that the word house in most languages can mean either the structure or the people who live in it. So if we meant the people who live in it, we would say household or family, right? Or in a royal sense, a dynasty. So really what he's saying is, you want to build me a house, I'll build you a dynasty. There's an exchange going on here. There's a gift giving on both sides. And now he describes this house. He says, when your days have been completed and you rest with your ancestors, so when you die, I will raise up your offspring after you, sprung from your loins, and will establish his kingdom. Okay, so I'm going to ensure a continuity of rule here. He, the offspring, is the one who will build my house for my name, not you. I will establish his royal throne forever. I, God, will be a father to him. Your son, will be a son to me. If he does wrong, which he will, I will reprove him with a human rod and with human punishments. But I will not withdraw my favor from him as I did from Saul. So this is an interesting twist here. So he's saying, I'm going to promise you, regardless of what happens in the future, a dynasty. I'll promise you that you'll have your own heir on the throne. No one's going to overthrow you. Um, and I'll treat that person like a son. Right? But if he messes up, I will not give him any privileges. Right? That's an important caveat there. And then he repeats. The basic theme is, your house and your kingdom are firm forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. Again, aspirational language. In historical terms, the house of David was a failed state. They survived for a couple generations and then they lost their kingdom. It's still referred to as a kingdom in the Bible, but it's really about the size of Stark County. So it's not really, it's like a kingdom with a small k. The idea of ruling all of Israel, they only manage it for a couple generations and then they fail. There are other dynasties in Israel that will be far more successful than them. And then you think of the great empires of the world that would go on for centuries and so forth. Anyway, but this is the idea. This is idealized language. Okay, so that's what God's going to do. All because David had a thought. He just had a thought. But by commemorating this with all this stuff, it seems to be saying that David's thought, or his consciousness, was kind of important, especially for kings, right? Because again, we remember from the older passages that we look at that kingship tends to corrupt people, right? But nevertheless, there was this one king who at one moment sort of realized how things ought to be. And God wants to commemorate that moment, that light bulb, right? Regardless of what happens afterwards. Okay, so Nathan tells everything about this to David. David's happy. He has a long-winded thank you, thank you, thank you. This is so great, he says. I'm going to thank you some more. I'm going to thank you some more even. Okay. Then there's another battle. Okay, well, why suddenly shift from this aspirational scene to more battles? Well, remember he said I would give you rest from your enemies? So you have to have stories about him defeating enemies, right? So he defeats another enemy, more Philistines. Neighboring peoples are defeated all over the place. Local, he dedicates their shields to the temple, to God and the shrine. People sort of ally with him. He establishes garrisons to control the region. So this is all to say in various ways God made him successful in all his undertakings. So first fulfillment was the military thing. We'll get rid of all warfare in the region. Then we're told in a kind of summary statement, he was king over it. He dispensed justice and right to all his people. Well, wasn't that the next thing that God said? People will never be disturbed or oppressed again. So we have this summary statement that he was a just ruler. And not only that, but we have a list of his cabinet, as it were. Right? You got his general, his chancellor, priests. This is the one who we've known in the past. Here's a new guy who shows up, a scribe. This is a new guy too, Benaiah. He's in command of the Kerethites and the Pelethites. You know who they are? Those are mercenaries. Those are mercenary forces from the Aegean, from the Greek world, which raises an interesting question. If David was such a just king, why did he need to pay mercenaries? Usually you only get mercenaries when you are not a just ruler, or when there are certain people who don't like you. So the fact that he's hiring foreigners to control his own people is a pretty typical move in the ancient Near East, but it suggests that the aspirational ideal is not really realized, but the idea is that it is. Finally, this is interesting. It says David's sons were priests. Okay, well, if you remember in the Torah, the Torah established a genealogical requisite for priests, right? They had to be members of a certain tribe or of a certain lineage. So neither of them had anything to do with David. So what this shows us is that the Torah is also aspirational. It presents ideals which don't always correspond to the historical realities. For example, priests are the only ones who are supposed to offer sacrifices in the Torah, and yet you have Samuel, who's not a priest, offering sacrifice in the story. So that just indicates that the traditions out of which this history are built are not the same as the Torah's. But anyway, on to the next bit. Okay, David has another thought. There's a guy named Ziba, not zebra, but Ziba. David says, is there any survivor of Saul's house to whom I may show kindness? Remember, because he defeated Saul's house by various means. He wants to show kindness to any survivors. He says, oh, well, Jonathan had a son. Remember, Jonathan was David's bosom buddy, and they made several oaths while he was still alive. So you'll never do anything bad to my family members. He says, okay, so he's trying to fulfill that now. Now that he has no more enemies, he wants to be friendly with potential enemies. So they find this one guy whose name is Mary Baal. Interestingly, many of the people in Saul's house, like Ishbaal and Mary Baal, they have the name Baal, which is a Canaanite god. Usually you name your children after the god you worship. So again, in the Bible, you have them only worshiping Yahweh, but their names suggest that they were a bit more ecumenical in their tastes. Anyway, David says, I'll take care of you because Jonathan was my friend. He says, why should you do this? I'm just a measly servant. He says, no, I'll take care of you. I'll give you some land to live on. I'll get this guy Ziba to take care of you. You'll be my friend. Okay. Then another thing happens. This is another enemy story. So neighbors, the Ammonites, they're the people who live across in what is now today modern Jordan. The king of the Ammonites dies, and his son succeeds him. The king was David's friend when he was an outlaw, right? Remember, when he became an outlaw, he sent his family members to be protected by this guy. And he said, I'll take care of them while you're an outlaw. So he's a friend of David. And David said, well, I'm going to go show kindness to his son because his father was kind to me. Okay, so he sends like an embassy to say, congratulations on becoming king. Unfortunately, Hanun, the new king, has evil counselors, bad counselors, as often happens in these stories, who give him bad advice, saying, David's not trying to be nice, he's trying to spy out your land. Right? He's not your friend. And unfortunately, the young guy listens to them, and we're told that he seizes the embassy, shaves off their beards. I'm not sure why the AI thought this was their beards, but maybe it was like shave them. Maybe that was the shaving, and put away their lower garments. Well, I noticed something about this AI stuff. So it's actually, I mean, it's beautiful artwork, and it's nice similar, tone to it. But it will not show violence or sex. Unlike the classical paintings of the Renaissance and stuff, it will simply not do it. So buttocks can't show that. All right, so Hanun offends David's messengers. David finds out that their beards on their heads were shaved. He says, wait till they grow back and then we'll settle this. So, a guy who didn't need to be his enemy picks a fight with him basically because of bad counselors. And so he says, we're going to make war against David. So they make a war against him. David sends out his general. They have a fight. They fight them. They agree how they're going to fight them. They fight them again. The bad guys run away. They get friends. There's more fighting. And finally, David drives his chariot over all of them. This is a classical illustration by Gustave Doré. David and his chariot slaying the enemy. Okay, so enemies down again. Okay, finally, all of the bad guys make peace with him. And then, but there's still sort of this battle going on with these people out there. There's some people who still haven't been subjugated. And this is the start point for the Bathsheba story. So we're told at the turn of the year, when the time for kings to go to war, David sent out his general to fight with his army, and he stayed in Jerusalem. Okay, now he's done this before, but it singles this out. It says kings should be in battle. If their soldiers are going to put their lives on the line, the king should be out in front, in other words, right? That's the ideal here. David is not doing that anymore. He's leaving the generals to do that. He's going to be safe at home. Question is, what is he going to do with all that time? So the next part has some language, nudity, and violence. Okay, one evening, David rose from his bed and stalked about on the roof of the king's house. Well, what was he stalking? It literally says he was walking about, but the verb to walk about is the same verb that was used when he was an outlaw. And it was like his merry men were stalking their prey. What prey is he stalking here? Well, it's this woman. Right? He sees from his roof, using the elevation of his house, he spies upon a woman who is cleaning herself in her bath. And of course, she's very beautiful, which means he'll be attracted to her. His first action is to send his people to inquire about who she is. And he is told she is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, Joab's armor. So Joab is David's general. The armor bearer is like an important officer. So this is the wife of an important officer in your army. What does he do? Well, he sends messengers to take her. Okay? And he takes her the other way too. When it says it was just the time when she had been purified from her period, it means she is now fecund. She is now capable of bearing children. Bad timing for David, right? Also bad thing to do. Okay. She returns to her house and is, in trauma at the moment. Notice, by the way, that nowhere does it say she went willingly. In the Western tradition of interpretation and representation in art, often people see this as a tryst between two consenting adults, but there's no indication of that here. This is a rape. So the king of Israel has raped someone else's woman, right? Against her will, obviously. And then she becomes pregnant. Her first action as a character is to send a message to say, I am pregnant. Right? So it's sort of throwing this in his face, saying, you've done something here that is, you got a problem now. So how is he going to solve the problem? Well, he says, send a message to her husband, bring her husband here. Now, if he was a just king, maybe he was bringing him here to say, well, I got to confess, I did something wrong. I hope you'll forgive me. After all, I'm your king, right? But instead, he's going to do something different. So he brings the husband back from the battlefield. And instead of saying, I've done something wrong, he says, how's Joab? How's the army? How's the war going? All's well. One wonders if this very terse conversation is concealing something. Obviously, he's leading up to something, right? He says, go down to your house and bathe your feet. Okay, so that is probably a euphemism for his genitalia. In other words, have sex with your wife. And he not only that, but David sends a dish with him. It's like, here's some champagne. He's like, go to your wife. So what's he up to here? What is he trying to do here? He didn't say that he did anything with his wife. Why is he getting him to have sex with his wife? Cover his tracks. So she's pregnant. It'll look like he was the father, right? So he's trying to conceal his tracks. Unfortunately for him, he does not factor in the fact that Uriah is a very humble and pious man, and if in the Torah, when you make war, you should not be having sex with your wife. That's something for peacetime in the logic of this. So he's not. The king has just invited him to do something bad, right? So instead of going to his house, he sleeps at the entrance of the king's house with the other officers that he came with. When the king finds out about this, he speaks. He has a talking to him. He says, aren't you tired? Don't you want to go home for a bit? And he replies, apparently without any sense of guile, how could I do this when the ark of God and the troops are all there in the hard life of battle? I can't come home and, indulge in all these luxuries while they're suffering. And he's presented as this very noble character. He says, okay, stay here today and tomorrow I'll send you back. Oh, you can go back, but let's just stay one more night. What is he going to do now? So we're told that the following day he tries to get him drunk, presumably to get him to have sex with his wife. And again, he sleeps his stupor off in front of the king's house. Again, yeah, he just go there. So it's this delightfully ironic narrative where the king is like trying to do everything except tell the truth and circumvent the response, the effects of his own actions, right? And not be caught with it. So finally, he says, "I want you to take a letter to Joab, your commander." And he doesn't tell him what's in the letter, but this is what it says: "Dear Joab, place Uriah up front where the fighting is fierce. Then pull back and leave him to be struck down dead. Your boss." So again, irony. He's carrying his own death warrant, just like in Hamlet, right? Um, so we now know, as the readers, that David is going to go to no ends to defend himself, right, against any kind of accusation. So Joab does his duty. He says, Uriah, you go up front. And Uriah dies, as expected. Then we have this, with this very kind of elaborate choreography of Joab. He wants to send word to David without explaining bluntly that he has murdered his man. Instead, he says to the messenger, you know, the king might get angry at you for what's about to happen. So, tell him, this is what happens in battle, right? When people go up front, they die. We didn't intend to do this. So tell him your servant is dead. And so the servant says, sorry about that, but, when we went up there, he died. And David says, oh, well, this is not a great evil, for the sword always does this in battle. Encourage my general. It's like saying thank you to the general without telling the servant that he's saying thank you, right? Apparently the servant doesn't notice that something's going on here. Okay. Again, trauma for being raped by the king. The king has now murdered her husband. She mourns. We're told once the mourning is over, David sends for her again and brings her into his house. She becomes his wife and bears him the son, right? But apparently this was not okay with Yahweh. Now, here again, where the consensual interpretation of this is she really wanted to marry David, and now David gave her a chance. She has been forced now to marry the murderer of her husband and her rapist. Not very nice, right? That's why he sees it as something evil here. Okay, so now we get the consequences. Nathan the prophet shows up, and he engages in this wonderful roundabout way of getting David to realize what he's done. He tells him a story. He says, in a certain town, there were two men, one rich, the other poor. The rich man had flocks and herds in great numbers. The poor man had only one ewe lamb. He nourished the ewe lamb. She grew up with him and his children. Here's the ewe lamb, at least the way he's figuring this. What little he had, the lamb ate. From his own cup, the lamb drank. Sounds like my cats. In his bosom, she slept. She was like a daughter to him. So it's like the family pet. A visitor came to the rich man, but he spared his own flocks and herds to prepare a meal for the traveler by taking the poor man's lamb and preparing it the one who had come to him. So a powerful person uses their power to take something from someone who is vulnerable. David reacts, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves death. He shall make full restitution. Okay, so notice what he got David to do. Got him to, because now he's going to say, oh, by the way, you're the man. This is also a pretty smart way of approaching a king, right? If he already knows that the king was willing to murder someone, the prophet doesn't want to be murdered either. So you got to get the king to agree with you first before you break it out that he's done this wrong, right? So now he finally gets him to confess, and then he delivers his oracle. So God begins by, I did all this for you, and this is how you reward me. I made you king. I delivered you from the house. So I give you Saul's house and his wife's. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. I could still count up the more things I've done for you. Why have you despised me and done this evil? You've cut down Uriah the Hittite with his sword. His wife you took as your own. You killed him with the sword of your enemies. Now, therefore, here's the consequence. The sword shall never depart from your house. Remember, he says, I'll give you rest from your enemies. But now here's the twist. He's going to make his own household his enemies. The sword will never depart from it because you despise me and taken the wife of Hittite to be a wife. By the way, this is very clear evidence that this was not a consensual relationship. She is not blamed for any of this. Right? If this were an adultery, they would both be blamed, right? But only he's blamed. Right? Very clear what the agency was here. Okay, so that's the prediction. And then he says, and this is probably the most disturbing passage in the Bible, because God admits to being an accessory to rape, which has not yet happened. He says, I will bring evil upon you out of your own house. I will take your wives before your very eyes, and I will give them to your neighbor. He shall lie with your wives in broad daylight. You have acted in secret, but I will do this in the presence of all Israel, in the presence of the sun itself. So basically, I'm going to make your wives be raped by your neighbor. Now, there is this thing in literature like this called dual causality, right? I think I've mentioned that before. Dual causality is when things are ascribed to God, even though human choice is what determines it. So exactly how you philosophically deal with that problem, but it's kind of problematic. God is saying, you've raped someone's wife. I will cause your wives to be raped. But when we actually see this happen, God's nowhere to be seen. It's completely, as we'll see, a result of David's own actions and how those actions rub off on his sons, who will be the main aggressors in this coming conflict. So, David's sad. Again, more disturbing stuff. The Lord has removed he's forgiving you. You won't die, but the child will die. So this also is odd. When God punishes David by killing his innocent family members or by harming them in some way. Not unlike what he did to the Pharaoh in the book of Exodus. Finally, David admits, okay, I did sin. The child gets ill. David prays that it survives. He won't eat. He prays again, and then they're told the child dies. David gets cleaned up, eats again. His servant saying, why were you not eating while it was still alive, but now that the child's dead, you're eating? He says, well, I was hoping maybe I could change God's mind, but now that he's dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall not go to him, but he will not return to me. So what do we make of this? This is an odd sort of detail. So obviously he feels bad, right? He's acknowledged he's done wrong, and he's praying that the innocent will not suffer because of him, and the innocent does suffer. But then when the innocent person is dead, he goes back to being normal. How do we interpret that? I mean, it's genuinely perplexing. Should we see this as a kind of fatalism on his part, maybe? That's one very possible interpretation that we'll see, maybe supported by some of his future inactions. Is he being crass? Is this sort of revealing a limit to his sympathy for others? Or is this a noble thing? Is he saying, I did everything I could? No point in doing anything more because it's decided already. How would we interpret this? I mean, this is at the climax of the bad thing that he does. What do we think about this? I honestly look for help with this because I don't know what to do with it.
Well, David was a man after God's own heart.
Except when he's not. Yes.
But so
He had that one moment, right?
He has gone to Yahweh and asked for the child's life,
Right.
asking for forgiveness.
All right.
But he's saying that that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So time to move on.
Okay.
Because he knows God well, and
Oh, okay.
when Yahweh makes a decision like this,
Okay. I think that's a reasonable point. There's a limit to it as well. The limit is that when he behaves like this later on, it will be seemingly because he thinks he can't do anything to change anything. Here he's actually trying to change something, but later on, he will just let things happen. He will allow injustice to go unpunished. He will allow his own family members to be harmed, and he will not lift a finger. It's acknowledge, sort of what we would call radical acceptance of the way things are. Maybe that's what this is. But of course, radical acceptance can also has a counterfeit, which is fatalism, right? Where we don't believe that our actions or our choices make any difference, right? And when we think that, bad stuff can happen too, right? Everything has its counterfeit. Maybe this is the good version of this. But we'll see. I mean, this is just the beginning of his descent. Okay, anyway, he has this thought. Okay, he consoles the woman who he raped, murdered her husband, and forced her to marry him. He consoles her, and he impregnates her again, and they have another son whose name was Solomon. He will become important later. And we're told that God loved Solomon, and the prophet Nathan named him Jedediah, which means beloved of Yahweh, is what Yedidiah means. When our son was born, my wife wanted to name him something bizarre like Jedediah, and I said, no. He will hate us for it. I could say it has a good source, but I think Jedediah might be a bit Jed, maybe. So Getty was the compromise, not too ordinary, not too extraordinary. Jedediah was one of the names that we thought of. Anyway, so that's the last we'll hear about Solomon for a while. We go back to David. So meanwhile, there's a fight going on. This is the fight that David should have been at, and the general is winning the fight, and he sends David to say, I've taken the first part of the city. Why don't you come, O king, and lead your men into battle, lest I be the one who captures the city, and my name, rather than yours, be the one that is praised. Now, again, how do we read this? Is he just being nice to David? Or is he saying, you better start acting like a king? Either of those are possibilities. Even the statement itself, you better come or else I'm going to do it, that's seen as a threat, potential threat to David, Who knows? Anyway, David takes his advice. He comes with his army. He defeats the bad guys. He, shows that he is in charge. After this, the following occurred. Okay, we're told, this part of the flashback here. So this was last week. We were told that he had a lot of sons. So this next story is about this son, his firstborn son, Amnon, and his third son, Absalom, right? So they are sons that were born they're like the senior sons of the family. We don't know exactly how many were alive at this time, maybe 15, but these are like the oldest sons that this story is about. Okay, here's the backstory. David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and David's other son Amnon loved his half-sister. Now, when it says loved, when you see what he does, I'm not sure loved is a totally appropriate translation. It's more like lust, perhaps, but we'll see how this goes. Anyway, he was in such anguish over his sister Tamar that he became sick. He's lovesick. She was a virgin, and Amnon thought it impossible to do anything to her. Well, again, that doing something to her, that sounds kind of like his father. Here's a big question. In these stories, God says, I'll have a sword, come out of your house in conflict. But we have a question here. Unless God is planting destructive thoughts in his son's brains, why would his firstborn son think that he could even conceive of being able to do something to a woman? Why would he ever think that? Like father, like son, maybe. So here's where, everyone knows the Bathsheba story. Here's where we see maybe the deeper consequences of it. It's not just that God was upset at him and caused the child to die, but his own sons are emulating his behavior. The fact that he chose to take the low road and escape responsibility and succeed, at least at the political level, maybe that leads them to say, well, if dad can do it, I can do it too. Anyway, again, we're not told, but this is something we can reflect on. Okay, so the story begins. Amnon had a friend, again, bad counselor, Yonadab, who was very clever. So he says, I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. And so Yonadab, who suddenly grows a beard, says, lie down on your bed and pretend to be sick. Okay? When your father comes to visit you, say to him, please let my sister Tamar come and encourage me to take food. If she prepares something in my presence for me to see, I will eat it from her hand. Oh dear. David buys it. He says, go to your brother, your half-brother Amnon, and prepare some food for him, please. Okay? She does. And this drawn out scene of showing how she bakes things, taking dough, kneading it, twisting it into cakes before his eyes, and frying the cakes. Is this a little titillation that we're supposed to see in his gaze? Maybe. Anyway, she takes the cakes to him, and he says, let's be alone here. Get all you other people out. And he says, please bring the food to my bedroom that I might have it from your hand. So she does so, brings it to the brother, and then suddenly he becomes a monster. Come, lie with me, my sister. And she tries to stop him, but he seizes her, just like David seized Bathsheba. And she has a fairly long speech. She's able to hold him off. She says, no, my brother, don't force me. This is not done in Israel. Do not commit this terrible crime. Where would I take my shame? And you would be labeled a fool in Israel. So please speak to the king. He will not keep me from you. Is this maybe just a survival strategy, just trying to use words to keep him at bay, perhaps? But whatever the reasoning there, he does not buy it. He captures her. He rapes her, just like Dad. Immediately afterward, he feels an intense hatred for her. The hatred he felt for her far surpassed the love or lust he had for her before. And his response is, get up and leave. And then she's, in trauma again. No, brother, because sending me away would be far worse than what you've already done to me. He says, nope, servant, get her out of here, and close the door after her. So a bit crass. And she tears her garments, which is a gesture of mourning. Her full brother, Absalom, questions why is she mourning and why is her clothing torn. Has your brother Amnon been with you? Now, his response seems a bit crass in of itself. Just keep still, sister. He's your brother afterwards. Don't take this to heart. Don't take it so hard. Thanks, bro. So Tamar remains devastated in the house of her brother. Now, Absalom is not actually going along with this. He's just being politic about it. So he's going to make it look like he's not upset about it. Eventually, she, though, talks to Dad. She tells him everything he did. And, well, to his credit, he's very angry. But if he were a real king and someone in his kingdom had harmed another person, not least his daughter, what would he do? He would punish that person, right? Instead, we're told he would not antagonize Amnon, his high-spirited son. He loved him because he was his firstborn. Okay, so here's a problem with people who have power. They often try to protect their own family members and not execute justice on them. Is that not true? That's sort of a problem. Here we see it here. Okay, so he's angry, but he's not going to do anything about it. And so Absalom stays quiet, but we're told he hated Amnon for having humiliated his sister. So since Dad didn't do anything, Absalom's going to take things into his own hands. He's not going to let his sister be devastated like that. And so 2 years later, it's sheep shearing time, and Absalom wants to lead the sheep shearing with David's sons. He says, hey, Dad, we're all going out to shear sheep. You want to come with us? Dad says, no, I don't want to be a burden to you. He says, oh, why don't you send Amnon with us? Why you want him to go with you? Maybe a little suspicion there. But he said, no, send him with us. We can all be bros together shearing the sheep. So finally he allows Amnon to go with them. And so Amnon prepares a banquet. Absalom prepares, here's Amnon drinking it up. And secretly, Absalom says to his attendants, watch, when Amnon is merry with wine, say to him, I'll say to you, kill Amnon and put him to death. Don't be afraid, for it is I who order you to do this. Be strong and act like warriors. And so Amnon is assassinated. And all the other sons who weren't involved in it, they ride off in fear, thinking that they might be assassinated too. They don't know what's going on. So obviously, this is sort of a vigilante killing, but had David executed some kind of justice, maybe this would not have happened. But again, why does Absalom think he has the right to do this? Well, David's not being king, is he? So, inaction provokes action. Okay, there's a scene in which David is told, Absalom has killed all your sons. Not one of them is left, which makes David sad. But then, fortunately, the bad counselor says, oh, he probably didn't mean all of them, maybe just the one who humiliated his sister. Surely they're all dead. And meanwhile, Absalom is running off into exile. The other sons return safely, and they too weep for the slaying of their son along with the king. Absalom, meanwhile, there's Absalom, he makes it to one of David's friends off on the other side of the Jordan named Talmai, king of Geshur, and he's going to stay there to be protected by him in exile for 3 years. Okay, during that time, we're told the king mourned Amnon, but it says his intention of going out against Absalom abated, and he was consoled over the death of Amnon. So again, if he was a real king, maybe even though maybe the killing might have been justified in some sense, if he was king, he would go off and at least try to apprehend Absalom, right, and bring him to justice. But instead, he allows Absalom to do what he did. Problem there. And notice it's all about his feelings. Well, of course he has feelings for his children, although one wonders, he didn't seem to have many feelings for Tamar, right? If he felt for her the same way he felt for his firstborn, maybe he would have punished him, but he didn't. Okay, so and we're told that the general sees this. He understands that the king is sort of softening towards the recalcitrant son. So Joab comes up with an idea, kind of like the prophet Nathan, where we're going to get the king to do something by indirectly getting him to agree with something. He says he finds this woman who's called a wise woman. Not sure what that means, other than that she's smart, she's wise. He finds a wise woman, someone who presumably who can be persuasive and give good advice. And he says, pretend to be in mourning, put on your mourning apparel, and go to the king and speak to him. He doesn't. We don't hear it what he's going to tell her to say. So she agrees to go. Okay, so she shows up and says, help, O king. What do you want? He says, well, I'm a widow. My husband is dead, and I have 2 sons, but one of them murdered the other. My whole clan is demanding me to give up my other son who killed his brother and put him to death. And if he's put to death, then my husband and me will have no posterity left on earth. So, in other words, there's been an injustice, but I don't want the other one to die. He's my only son who's left. Okay, so the king responds saying, okay, I will issue a command to protect you and him. They get into this conversation about what if people object. And he swears, as the Lord lives, not a hair of your son shall fall to the ground. So again, David is expressing his notion of justice here. Right? He doesn't want vengeance to be carried out. She says, by the way, I have something else to tell you. Okay. It's a long something. Summary. Well, if you are able to grant that for me, why can't you grant to your people the security for your own son, right? Rather than allowing him to languish in exile. Why banish your own son? And then maybe this is her wisdom. She says, look, consider human nature. We humans must indeed die. We are like water that is poured out on the ground and we cannot be gathered up. So life is short, right? Life is precious. Though God does not bring back to life, he does devise means so as not to banish any from her. So if God is forgiving, even if he punishes, surely you should be, right? After all, you're God's surrogate, right? So if I presume to speak on this matter, it's because people have given me cause to fear. So eventually he figures out, and she really lays it on. He says, the word of my lord the king is like an angel of God, discerning good and evil, right? You're so wise. Surely you'll agree with me. David figures out that Joab is behind this, but he kind of appreciates the strategy. He says, surely Joab told you to do this. She says, yes, it's just as you've said. See, I told you you were smart and wise. You figured this out. Right? So notice how she's really using words to get the king to come to this reconciliation. So finally, the king brings the general and says, yeah, that's a pretty smart thing you did. Go back and get Absalom, bring him here, and he will be safe. Okay, so Joab goes off. He brings Absalom back. Absalom is gaining some hair here. But he says you can't. The king says, I won't let him appear before me in court. So he still has to sort of keep a distance to me. Okay, but he gets to live in Jerusalem, and we're told that, oh my goodness, there is no more one beautiful than him. Flawless from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. This is kingship material, right? We've seen like Saul was handsome, David was handsome. Surely this son of David is worthy to be king, if we can just get the father to reconcile. And not only that, but he had hair that was really long. I'm not sure what that means. His hair was so long that when they weighed it, it was 200 shekels of silver. So I'm not sure what that means, but he had long hair. He had a family. That's always nice to know. He named his daughter Tamar after his sister. He lived for 2 years in Jerusalem, but finally he decided he was going to approach the king or appeal to the king for some sort of reconciliation. He tries to get Joab to do this, but Joab doesn't respond to his messages. So he tells his servants, go burn one of Joab's fields. That'll get his attention. So they burn Joab's field, and Joab is told, Absalom's servants are setting your field on fire. Well, that brings him here. He says, why are you burning my fields? Well, he says, I sent a message, come here, to say to the king, why did I come back from this place of my exile? It would be better if I were still in exile. So let me appear before the king. If I'm guilty, let him put me to death, but don't keep me locked up in this castle the whole time. So basically he's saying, I'm done being an exile. Help me out here. So apparently Joab takes the hint and he reconciles them. Okay, so that's our stopping point for tonight. What has happened so far? So David has consolidated his kingship. He's got the box. And because of his one good thought, that God should have a house at least as nice as mine to show that he's in charge and I'm not, God says, I like that. Let's commemorate that. You will have an eternal dynasty, or all this. We'll never have any more enemies, never more injustice. And then David himself violates that, right? It's not just that he was a lecherous man who happened to do something bad. No, this was the man who was supposed to represent this goodness, and now he flummoxes it, right? And what we see also here is that his behaviors and his mentality rub off on at least two of his sons, right? Definitely to Amnon and maybe to Absalom as well. Now, it looks like Absalom is on the straight and narrow again, right? But that also seemed to be the case with David and Saul. Remember, Saul repented, and then he went right back to chasing David. Absalom's going to be like that, only worse. Again, the point of this is that we can see psychologically that all of these things are not being dictated by some divine puppet master. When he says, I will bring this out of your house, it obviously can't mean I'm manipulating them. He's simply allowing the consequences of David's own behavior to play out, right? He's not going to stop it, as it were. What do we think of David? I mean, again, he still is a complex character. He's not just an evil genius, right? He does have feelings that are positive towards his children. He feels sorry that an innocent person is dying because of him. He retains some positive characteristics, but of course, the main problem here is not that he did wrong, but that he's not going to prevent other people from doing wrong. He's not going to prevent other people from being harmed. And that's exactly what kings are supposed to do, right? Or anyone in a leadership role, responsibility role, they're supposed to prevent injustice, right? So what are our thoughts about David at this point? And can we see how he is kind of descending into the position that he is here, sort of his own doing. By the way, Bathsheba will be able to get her day in court eventually. Um, she is primarily presented as a victim. Um, we're not told what she thinks or what she wants, but eventually she's going to be able to dictate who becomes David's successor, maybe even against David's own thoughts. So she will get her day, but at the moment she is sort of, just part of the collateral damage of David's decisions. Yeah. Yes, the box.
So, did they ever actually erect a senior house for it, or did it remain with it?
Yes, David's son is going to build a temple around it. This is the temple in Jerusalem. If you see pictures of Jerusalem, you can see this commemorative dome called the Dome of the Rock. That is built on the site of the temple, right? If you go into the Dome of the Rock, you can see various. It's all non-iconic, but it's all sort of patterns that are meant to imitate that temple. So that is traditionally where the temple stood. That is no longer there. And if you've seen these big giant stones, these sort of walls, what's called the Wailing Wall now, that's the foundation of this temple, not the actual one that Solomon will build, but actually that Herod will build later on top of it. But certainly when the temple was destroyed in the year 70 AD, and has never been rebuilt, this place, the direction of this place is sacred to Jews. You pray towards the Temple Mount. But this is sort of the backstory to how the temple came about. Yeah, so the idea is that the tabernacle, right, this movable shrine is going to become a permanent location, right? And this will become sort of the cosmic center of the universe at that point. Think of it this way, and we'll see this idea develop. That in the Torah, God has his mountain, right? He's on Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, but that's out in the desert. You have to go a long way to find that, right? Jerusalem is at the center of civilization, as it were, right? So he's moving address to this place where he will become more effective in the world. That's at least how Solomon is going to present this. Um, I like to use the example of a cell phone tower. So traditionally, a shrine is some place that you actually have to go to and communicate with the divine through sacrifice and things like that. Solomon is going to add a new technology to that called praying. Like a cell phone, this temple that Solomon's going to build, no matter where you are on the planet, if you are looking in the right direction, if you're pointing in the right direction, your prayer will be effective. So it's not just the place, it's the directionality. So again, when I say it becomes sort of the sacred center of the earth, it becomes the direction of prayer, basically. And that's something that becomes important to the later religions that come out of this. For Jews, it's the Temple Mount. For Christians, it's Jesus imaged as a temple. For Muslims, it's the Kaaba and Mecca, but it's the same idea of there's the one place which makes all things effective, right? And that's what's different about it from the mountain in the past. And we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's the significance of it. Yeah. Any other thoughts, or either on David or what we covered, or what's coming? So next time we get to find out what happens to Absalom and David, and Joab's going to have the big one-liner. I'll spill it tonight. Joab is going to upbraid David eventually and saying, "You love those who hate you, and you hate those who love you. And if you don't change, you're going to lose your kingdom." And he will listen to him actually at that point. Okay, so that's it for tonight. Thank you for coming.